Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott here with Spencer Bauer. I was going to say Stephanie Bauer, and that wasn't it.
Nope.
Stephanie Tokos and Spencer Bauer.
Yes, that's correct. We are here.
Yes.
Excited to talk with you guys today. Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
So if you've been here any amount of time, you're probably familiar with both Spencer and Stephanie, but I also know there's a lot of new people and want to introduce you in that sense to those that may not know who you are. So Spencer and Steph both are some of our member partners, which we are members of our church that are also ministry partners serving in a parachurch context. They are both working on and with students across Los Angeles in different ministries at different places. We have in addition, Spencer, you and your wife, Sarah, we got lots of S's here.
I was just thinking about that.
I think this is part of why it's like throwing me off.
Spencer, Steph, Sarah.
Yeah.
So,
Sarah, where are you?
So Spencer and Sarah serve together. We also have the Jeff and Emily Pauls who serve with Destino. They are actually a part of the church plant in Shalom, and they've been off campus for the last couple of months just with paternity and maternity leave. Excited for them. Excited for what's going on there. Some of you also remember Jason and Aaron Jew, who are serving on university campus at the University of Cincinnati. Super thankful for them. But both of you are serving here in LA on different campuses in different ways in LA. Especially after the last couple of years, it's kind of an interesting moment. And so I want to get into that in what ministry on campus looks like, particularly this year. But will you each just remind us of where you're serving, maybe how long you've been there, and the kind of ministry you're doing?
I got the green light. I am serving at Cal State Long Beach, so not quite LA. I do live in LA, so Cal State Long Beach, and
I'm sorry, is that like a big, like for people that live in Long Beach, is it important to them that it's not LA?
You know, it's still LA County.
Yeah,
so I think some people do like try to not be associated with LA. But I think it's funny because it's still LA County.
Yeah.
And so you're not quite Orange County and you're not quite LA. So you're more in the middle, but you want to associate more with Orange County, I think.
Oh, gotcha.
Interesting.
I didn't know this.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry if there are people from.
Yeah. People in Long Beach are like, what?
Yeah.
It's the South Bay, man.
Yeah.
It's like good middle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. So you're serving at Cal State Long Beach.
Cal State Long Beach with the Navigators. And I have been there now this is the start of my third year. So kind of crazy that it's gone by so fast.
Yeah. Well, quite a 3 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Quite an interesting first 3 years in a location.
Yep.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So did you start at the beginning, like in August of 3 years ago?
August 2020.
Okay, yeah. So we honestly, I didn't realize that me and Sarah and Steph all started on campus the same semester. You were just at the beginning. We came in November.
Okay.
So
we're
almost at 3 years. Yeah.
All right. And so where are you at?
Yeah. So my wife, Sarah, and I help lead Bridges LA, which is the international student ministry of Cru or Campus Crusade, serving students primarily at UCLA and USC, and also a little bit at Long Beach State, actually.
Nice.
One of our teammates works down there. And so we've been here almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years next month.
Okay. So what led, I'd love to get even just a little bit of your background, because I know that this isn't, where you are now for either of you isn't like the first step in ministry. This isn't like your kind of first ministry context. And so what led you to want to work on a university campus? And then what led you to the campuses you're working at now?
Yeah, I can.
We're gonna switch.
I just got the green light back, which was the point.
The finger point.
That was the green light from earlier that I gave Steph. So. This is a little bit behind the scenes, you know. Right. We're just bringing you in, the listener, to this
well-polished.
You're only hearing us, yeah. It's a bunch of points and nods. Yeah, man, I think it really just goes back for me because of how God used my time in college in my own spiritual growth. I mean, I grew up going to church, but I didn't know how to be a spiritual leader until I got to college, and what it actually looks like to share my faith, to share the gospel, and to be a spiritual leader. Man, and honestly, I can't really think of many things that have kickstarted spiritual growth in my life more than evangelism. Being able to share the gospel and be in conversations with people who may have heard it before, grown up with it, or not at all. But and even regardless of how the person you're talking to responds to the gospel, just the practice for yourself of rehearsing the gospel and speaking out loud is such an impactful thing. And college was also where God expanded my world vision and my understanding of God's heart for the world. If I could share a quick story, my sophomore year, I was living in the dorms, but I didn't have a roommate. And so the university just gave me a random one. And being in Kansas, I figured it'd be a guy from like Kansas City, a guy that looked like me, talked like me, just a white guy from Kansas or from Kansas City. And it turned out to be an international student from China. And that was just so completely off my grid. I had never been to China. I didn't really know anything about China besides that it was really big and really far away. That was about it. Yeah. And but me and his name was Musin, and we quickly became good friends, and we did everything together. And about a month in or so, I was going to church, and he was asking where I was going, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to church." And he's like, "Church? What's church?" And I realized that my friend Musin had never been to church before in his entire life. He had never read the Bible. And it just like blew me away because I grew up in church. I grew up here and Jesus died for my sins every Sunday. And yet now I was living with a guy who literally had to cross an ocean and be randomly put as my roommate for, me to be able to share the gospel with him for the first time.
Yeah.
And just seeing Musin face to face and seeing it verse after verse in the Bible that God has a missionary heart. He has an outward heart. He wants people to know him. And it just changed the trajectory of my life to meet somebody who had never heard the gospel before.
Yeah. What a providential placement, right? Like just you had no idea that not only was that not what you expected, right, but going to shape the direction of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of an uncommon thing because, most of the time the university did pair Americans with other Americans and international students with other international students from their country. And so, just God put him in my path, and my life hasn't looked the same since.
That's cool.
So,
that's cool.
Yeah, and then after me and Sarah graduated from K-State, we both joined staff with the traveling team, which is a different ministry than what we're on staff with now, which is what Scott was kind of alluding to. And that's actually where me and Sarah met, even though we went to the same undergrad. We didn't really know each other until that time. But the traveling team was mission mobilization, so we basically traveled full-time talking about God's heart for the world and missions and helping people get involved with that. And after living out of a suitcase for 4 years, we were ready. We were ready to not be guests, but be hosts finally, and unpack the suitcase and have drawers and we felt like God was calling us to welcome international students. And Bridges has been a great vehicle for us to do what we feel like God's called us to. And LA is such a strategic place where you have literally over 35,000 international students. Most of them are from some of the least Christian places on earth, and they're right here in our city, where there's also lots of Christians and great churches. And it was just a really exciting opportunity to step into, which LA is very different from Kansas. Yeah, it's a very different opportunity. But and even 3 years in, I'm still learning new things about this city that we love.
For sure. That's really cool. So what about you, Steph? What brought you to work on a university campus and to Cal State Long Beach?
Mm-hmm. I feel like if you ask most college ministry workers, will say college was a pivotal point in our life. There's something significant about it. I know, Spencer, you mentioned that, and it's not very different for me, where I grew up Catholic, and just a few years before going to college, we started going to a Christian church. But my understanding of the gospel and grace and God's love was shaped really primarily in my time at UC Davis. As a transfer student, I was going up there by myself, leaving my family for the first time. And so I was really desiring a community that was going to help me grow in my faith, mostly because I was kind of scared that if I wasn't in a community that was going to help me grow in my faith, I was going to walk away from it. And as the Lord would have it, I received a scholarship that required me to have a mentor where I was going. And so I'm standing in the middle of my apartment, and I get a phone call from this lady named Robin, who worked with the Navigators. And she just said, "Come out. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to have this place for you." I said yes because it was an awkward phone call, and I wanted to get off the phone.
The obligatory yes.
Yeah. But my responsibility is just like, well, you said yes, now you have to go. And that just changed the whole trajectory of like, even just like, I went to Davis to study chemistry. And like, it now became about growing in my relationship with the Lord and understanding more about his love and his grace for me. And they gave me plenty of opportunities to do that via discipleship, and just have someone who's asking me questions every week. And so because that was such a like shaping moment for me, I think really desiring, okay, God, like I can give up 2 years of my life to do this with other college students. 2 years has now turned into 7.
Yeah.
Because when I graduated, they actually did send me to UCLA. Was my first formal context working in ministry. And so I was at UCLA and then 3 other places before coming back to LA and going to Cal State Long Beach. And so now I get to meet with women one-on-one and help disciple them and ask very similar questions like, what is the gospel? What does it mean to you? But how do you grow deeper in your faith? How does this actually like impact you for a lifetime more than just, oh yeah, like Jesus is the answer to that, right?
Yeah.
So it's been really sweet.
So you mentioned you were a transfer student.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you at Davis?
I was only at Davis for 2 years.
You were only at Davis for 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what. So you said that. That's what I was imagining, right? It's a big 2 years.
That's awesome.
But I think to me it underscores the unique opportunity and the power of doing university ministry, right? These are such pivotal, transformative moments in people's lives. I think a lot of us have experienced that.
Yeah.
My faith solidified and the Lord radically changed my life my sophomore year in college. Like that's absolutely a part of my story. And it's not everybody's story, right? There's lots of Christians with lots of different stories, but it's not an uncommon story. And what a pivotal, strategic opportunity it is where you're only at UC Davis for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? You're only there for 2 years.
Yeah.
And the Lord both solidified your faith and transformed your heart in a way that's shaped now the last 7 and counting as you're committed to that. I mean, both for students, in state and for international students, right? That are here for the first time out of their countries. Usually for the first time ever.
Yeah, unless they did like a short like vacation or something like that.
Yeah, but at least living outside of their country for the
and
first
not
time.
only that, but the majority of our students in Bridges that we found are master's students, which means that they're not here for a 4-year undergrad or a 6 7 PhD or doctorate or something. And so this is really encouraging to hear because it's like, our Bridges ministry, the overturn is like 50% every year because every 2 years by and large. And so this is encouraging me, Steph. Like those 2 years are long enough, there's still work to be done there. And
it reminds me, both of that on from a ministry standpoint and from, I'm now a parent, right? With starting to talk about university from the other end, right? Where I'm like not looking back, but looking forward to it. And, there's all sorts of different options, whether it's, what's best academically, what's best cost-wise, things like that, like you spend it. And it reminds me that the Lord's doing all this work and orchestrating these things. And sometimes you're like, oh, well, if it's not 3 years or 4 years, like, is there going to be enough time for like what, I don't think the Lord's ever short on time.
Just look over at Steph, man. Like, she turned out great.
That's right. No, but I think that the Lord's never short on time, and he loves doing exactly with every pocket, whether it's a 2 years master's degree, whether it's, a 2 years at an undergrad, whether it's 4 years at an undergrad and the work that he's doing, whether it's, it takes all sorts of different shapes. Yeah. But also what a pivotal time and what an important ministry. And this is why I'm so thankful for what you guys are doing, that as an extension of the local church, we have opportunities to be engaged with these students in ways that we otherwise wouldn't. It's really exciting.
That even makes me think. So earlier this past week, I was reading the Bible with some guys, and we were looking at the story of David and Goliath, which is such a just ubiquitous. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath, even if you're not a Christian. It's like every sports movie ever. It's just such like a. But if you think about it, like that event happened on the other side of the world thousands of years ago, just in some field between, like, in one battle between one people and another people. Yeah. And yet God, like, chose to use that. Because near kind of the end of the story, David even proclaims, like, right before he kills Goliath, he says, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. Yeah. And, man, just God uses, like, what seemingly, like, off to the side, or maybe, it even makes me think of some of the sermons the last couple of weeks where, it's the foolishness of the world or the foolishness of the church. It looks foolish, but that is where God loves to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know you're both in that sense. I mean, we've talked about it a bit, but you're working with different students in different student populations. What are some of the unique dynamics about the parts of the student population each of you are working with? I mean, and part of that's also just added these institutions that are so large. Right? It's not like, oh, we're there to reach 40,000 people, right? Like inevitably, the Lord finds these pockets and things like that of students that you're working with. So, what are some of the unique dynamics of the student populations each year working with?
Green light. I think I've been encouraged with Cal State Long Beach just for different, in part, like the demographics. A big part of just where the school is makes it a commuter campus. And so I think we have had to figure out, like, how do we care for these students, and how do we host events that are going to cater to some of these students are going to go home and work. They're going to go home to their families, have other responsibilities outside of school. And so to have things a little bit earlier in the day so that either they're like with us and like staying to like, I'm not going to like brave an hour of traffic right now. Or it's not like late enough to where they're like, I just can't wait around for 4 hours, which would be more typical. Like at Davis, we had things starting at 8:00 at night, and over here
because everybody's living there, everybody's living in the dorms or on campus, or at least right around campus.
Yeah, and so it's not like a small college town feel, where some people could live I live 30 minutes away. And so like if students are 30 minutes to an hour away, then they more easily are going to go home. And so I think we've like seen that a little bit more, as the campus has like opened up to full capacity, just how much of a commuter school it is. And so trying to figure out like, how do we cater to these students? We're not specifically targeting international students, but I think it's also been fun to see just how diverse the Lord has made our group, where we have some students from Ghana, we have students from Nigeria, we have students who've grown up in Carson, and that's just like the life that they know. And so it's been pretty sweet just to see like in the midst of all of this, God is bringing different people who have the capacity to take the gospel out. Despite like, okay, I can't hang out with you until 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, totally.
Totally. It's been a good group, I think.
Has that been a learning experience for the ministry, or has that always been what ministry at Long Beach looks like?
It's definitely, I think, been a learning experience. So my boss, my campus director, has been there for 5 years. And so as he was coming in, having to learn these dynamics, it was him and another guy who were working on campus, no ladies, no staff women. So having to figure out both like the women's side of things, like how do we care for ladies well when there's no staff women, and how do we like cater to the commuter campus? So I think that like a lot of that was figured out as I arrived. The commuter side of things was pretty like set already. Where like it was more of an adjustment for me and my teammate who came 3 years ago. Yeah,
from your previous experience and things like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm so encouraged by that though, because I think that by and large, I don't have any statistics, but I'm at least anecdotally, and I'm going to assume that commuter campuses don't get the attention and investment that more traditional large college campuses get because of the nature of ministry, because of the familiarity and things like that. And so the commitment and diligence to reach in a way that is contextualized and not typical, I think opens the door to reaching students that I'm assuming there's not 3, 4, 5 large campus ministries on campus like other traditional campuses, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's ministries needed there too.
Like the universities that I'm at, like USC and UCLA.
Which is great, but it's a unique challenge, and one that can oftentimes be like, well, that's too hard to figure out.
Yeah. And in the last few years, we've grown, but we've gone from like 10 students who've like been faithful to 25, 30 students who will come around and be with us.
Wow,
and so it's definitely like a different feel than like, not that you're specifically with Crew, but like when we were at UCLA, Crew is like, oh, we have 500 students. Like, that's not.
yeah, totally.
So just a different feel, I think, in general.
Wow. Well, I'm so thankful for that. It's just so exciting to see what the Lord's doing there and through that faithfulness and diligence. All right. So, and Spencer, you're working not just at UCLA and USC, but specifically with international students. What are some of the unique dynamics at work there?
Yeah, and I was even going to just say, like, man, I think it's awesome that you're working at places like that, because that just shows the power of ministry, that it is adaptable. The message isn't changed. The goal, see disciples of all nations made, isn't different, but I think that's awesome that you guys are learning how to do that better. I love the Navigators. It's actually Navigators has some I have some Navigators DNA. I feel like in my spiritual faith, and a couple tools that are coming to mind right now, and TMS and all the rest.
A lot of tools.
Yeah, both me and Steph we're obeying the Great Commission in Matthew 28:19. Go and make disciples of all nations. Making disciples and even disciple makers in many ways. I mean, that's like the bread and butter of what Navs does. And don't over torque this, this contrast too much, because like you were just saying, there is diversity. There are all nations in that sense. On the other hand, Bridges, we are doing that same thing, trying to make disciples of all nations, but I would say the emphasis is on the all nations. And not even just any nations, but particularly some of the most unreached, difficult to reach places where In particular, our students, they come from places like East Asia, China, Japan, South Asia, like India or Sri Lanka or Nepal, or from like the Middle East, Southeast Asia as well. And they are most commonly, like Scott was saying, this is their first time in the U.S. or maybe second time. They are here most often for a master degree, although there's still thousands of undergrad and also PhD students as well. So a lot of our work looks like that evangelism, because they have no familiarity, no background to church or the Bible or the gospel at all, or even evangelism or even pre-evangelism, I guess if you want to call it that. We get to be some of our students' first impressions of Christianity, of Jesus, of the Bible. Like even I was talking about David and Goliath earlier. There's a couple guys in that group who had not heard of David and Goliath, even though it's such a common metaphor, I guess, common story. And even the other thing with that pre-evangelism is that we also encounter a lot of misconceptions or negative preconceptions that surround like our faith in their cultures. So a lot of what we're doing is not building on like an underlying Christian worldview. At best, we're working at like ground zero. There's nothing to build on.
Yeah.
And in many ways, there's actually some negative work. There's some undoing that we need to do, whether it's like a different worldview, but even like just negative understandings or incorrect understandings of what who Jesus is and who Christians are and what it looks like to be a Christian.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think that it's even that concept of pre-evangelism, I think is one that is both really helpful. And I also think that even when you say it, I think that a lot of people are familiar. They're like, oh yeah, sometimes that's what's needed, right? Like sometimes I'm just dismantling your untrue preconceptions, and how much more when people are coming from a culture or a place where there is literally not only no access to the gospel, but not even access to a faithful representation of who Jesus is or who Christians are. So
it stretches your faith, because they start asking questions that you haven't thought about, or some of the things that you just assume. Growing up in a Christian, if you grew up in the church, or even just in America, a couple of decades ago, a lot of our like even cultural assumptions. So it just makes it like it's difficult, but it grows your faith in ways that you don't expect, and it also just brings a real freshness when you come to stories like David and Goliath that, oh man, I've heard this over and over. Yeah. Big guy, little guy, rock in the forehead. Like I know what's going to happen, but the stories just come alive again in different ways when you get to read it with somebody who has no context for it.
Man, I'm so blessed by that. And so encouraged by the way in which even those conversations strengthen and encourage your faith. Yeah. Right. And then work through. So, I know I gave you like a list of some preliminary questions just so you can think through ahead of time. I want to go a little bit off script here.
Let's do it.
Because as you guys are talking, one of the things that comes to my mind is Ephesians 4:11, where God talks about how he gave the church, he says, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, to the building up of the body. And we focus on that a lot about how one of our primary jobs as pastors is to equip the saints for the works of ministry. I think that's rooted in there. But I've also been thinking recently just about both the gifting and role of evangelists in the local church, where just like shepherding or teaching or counseling, these are things that every Christian is called to.
Yeah.
Right? There are also people that are uniquely gifted and uniquely called to spend a disproportionate amount of their life and efforts and times in that area, right? And so, and both of those things are true. I think sometimes we want to err on one side or the other, right? Either, that's evangelism's like something evangelists do and the rest of us don't have to.
For like professional Christians.
Yes, exactly.
You go to seminary for that.
Or evangelism is just the thing all of us do, what's different about this person? Well, no,
Yeah.
it's both. It's both something we're all called to do and something that people are uniquely called to do. But one of the things that I think, one of the ways that the church benefits isn't just by getting to see evangelists at work or hear about evangelists at work and be like, I'm so glad somebody's doing that. Clap, 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 clap. Right? Like we're not just we're not just senders, but we also, by the ministry of evangelists, the church is further equipped for evangelism. The church is further encouraged and exhorted towards evangelism. They dovetail and work together. One of the reasons I've thought about this recently is I've thought about it on even just on the pastoral side. Anybody who knows him knows that Ara is a uniquely gifted and passionate evangelist. Like he is,
for sure.
That is like the heartbeat, is his heartbeat. And I see the way that him as an evangelist, and I think a uniquely gifted evangelist, a uniquely called evangelist, as well as a shepherd and pastor. But I see how that shapes and affects those around him, how it shapes and affects the church. I see how it shapes and affects us as other pastors. Who
it's kind of contagious.
It is, and I think that's part
Maybe
of
I
how.
shouldn't use that word, post, but you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
You can't help but kind of be drawn in some way.
You can't. And so all that to say, that's a big setup. But I want to.
It's going to be a big question now.
No, but I would love to hear how you hope the church will be continually shaped and equipped for evangelism in all their spheres as those who are uniquely gifted and called to the work of evangelism vocationally at this point in your life and ministry.
Yeah. I think even that's something that, like, for our students this year, like a big hope that we have, not just as Cal State Long Beach navigators, but we've talked about it regionally, that how do we encourage our students to not just think about, like, we kind of distinguish a little bit between the two, but like cold turkey evangelism, which we do like very like almost 24/7 for the first 2 weeks of school. Of like I don't know if recruit freshmen or die is like the kind of mindset. Like if we don't recruit students at the beginning of the year, then it almost kind of seems very hard to pull them away from, like, they're like entrenched in school. They're maybe starting different clubs, sports clubs, other ministries. Like, you're like set already in what you want to do for the rest of the semester after the first month or so. And so we do a lot of cold turkey evangelism, quote unquote, where it's just like, hey, I'm going to stop you. Can I share the gospel with you for 5 minutes? I got like a shirt or a water bottle or something. Just to like get them to stop. Yeah. And they hear the gospel. So we probably had about 600 students that we talked to in the first 2 weeks of school, getting to share, using the bridge, navigators, Romans 6:23.
Yep, I know it.
Just to get them to like know what the gospel is. But then to help our students kind of shift their mindset of, hey, like, it doesn't just stop there. Really what we want is to help equip them to be able to do relational evangelism, where who is the student who's sitting next to you in class that you're seeing every single week, numerous occasions, that you can be intentional with and share your faith and share what you're learning and not hide behind like, oh yeah, I went to church, or I'm part of the navigators and we talk about these things, to get almost kind of that like ground building of, I want to build a relationship with you so that there's trust, but so also that I can share the gospel with you and help you know Jesus and God, who's gonna be like so much better and like far worth more than anything that you can give yourself to in college. And so thinking about even just for like the church, like relational evangelism should be less scary than thinking about like, I'm going to go talk
to a stranger and try to catch people as they're walking by.
And so to think about like, I have a lot of people around me that need to know the gospel. I have family members, I have friends and community members neighbors who don't know Jesus. And so how do I invest in those relationships with the hope of sharing the gospel?
Okay, so I've got a quick follow-up question for you. Steph, I want you to imagine someone on a Sunday morning, like you're sitting next to them and they turn to you and say, you know what, I feel like you're somebody I could ask. How should evangelism be a part of my life?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I feel like I should probably share Jesus, but it's kind of awkward. Like I don't know how to bring it up. If someone like gave you the softball, so in the church was like, how should evangelism be a part of my life? What would you tell them?
Like there's like an inkling, right? For like, I should do this. Mm-hmm. Like, who would you want to share that with? Like, who's already like in your life that you know and say like, do they know Jesus? Are they like a believer? Do they have questions? Like, think about those people and like ask them to go get coffee. Ask them to come with you to the grocery store, and like those like natural places and things that people do all the time, that you have an opportunity to then ask the harder questions of both like life and faith, where you are like, you're in a more normal environment, I guess I could say, than church members going to college campus, just because like that's where I can do it.
Yeah. So why are you on campus again? I just happened across this, box of shirts, and I thought I'd hand them out.
And just gonna hand them out. But it's just a natural question, right? To think about, who are you around, and like, why not start there?
I love that. I think that's so encouraging, Steph. And it's what I love about it is I think sometimes the concept of evangelism is really scary for college students, for average church members,
for anybody,
for everybody,
for me and Steph.
Yeah,
sometimes
exactly.
I may or may not still have to go to the bathroom sometimes before the cold turkey stuff.
Yeah,
but the way you describe it, again, like what I love hearing it that way, because you're like, oh, I could do that.
Yeah,
and like I can take an intentional step in that direction.
I can say hi to my neighbor.
Yeah. And with intentionality, right? Not just being present, but being like, I really do want to share the gospel with you. I really want to look for opportunities to open that door. Okay. So Spencer, I'd love to hear you share a little bit about how you hope that the existence of evangelists in the church might influence or give the church as a whole a vision for what sharing the gospel and evangelism can look like in their lives, or why it even should be a part of their life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that I love about Cornerstone, is that it's built by its members. One of the things that the pastors I heard multiple times as we were going through the, intro to Cornerstone classes was, hey, Cornerstone was this way, and then you joined it, and so now it's different. And man, what is Cornerstone about? It's about the heart of Cornerstone is the heart of its members. And so I think the value of a quote evangelist, or somebody who has a special calling, is it shows God's heart for that thing, just like we have people who have a heart for disability, and a heart for counseling, and a heart for all these things. Man, if it's in the Bible and the heart of God, then having somebody in our church, an evangelist with a special calling, is going to help the entire church more fully follow that command. Because, like you're even saying, there are special callings for people to be evangelists, but the command to evangelize is universal for all Christians.
The Great Commission is for everybody.
Yeah. The Great Commission is not just for, Steph and I over here. Like, we need a lot of help, And I think what Steph was saying was really gold, because she's like, man, cold turkey evangelism is hard, but it's valuable. Not only just because, like, we know people do come to faith, like they've never heard the gospel, and cold turkey, they heard it once and they're like, that's exactly what I want, you know? For a lot of people, it takes, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, you know? But I think what another big value of that cold turkey is it just gives people some of those specific tools, like, how do I share the gospel? Like I've heard like a 45-minute sermon, and like I know the gospel was in there, but I don't have time to like memorize and then say that. So like I think some of those cold turkey things, just helping people have like tools that they can put in their tool belt to like. But then the other thing you said of just like relational evangelism makes me think of the sermon that I think Matt preached a year ago, or it was part of the missional hospitality. And it was, hey, well, I'm not asking you, to add in another 2 hours in your week called evangelism. It was look around you, who in your life has God placed there who doesn't know Jesus, but they know you and you know Jesus, and just helping the church move in that way. So I think there's like a balance between like, here's a bunch of programming, here's like the Bridges event to come to share the gospel, because it should just like become a growing heart desire. But some of those tools and those specific things, like go with Steph. She could teach you how to share the gospel.
Well, so this question is probably unfair, because a part of this is collecting tools that the Lord uses in, different things in different ways, right? And with different people. But similarly, if a church member turned to you, somebody in the church turned to you Sunday morning and was like, hey, I'm so glad I got to sit next to you. I really want to share the gospel with my coworker. How do I start? Like, what do I tell them? Like, I feel like I just want them to talk to you or like come listen to a sermon, but right? Like how would you point or instruct or encourage them?
Well, they don't have to do it alone. I mean, I can come along with you if you want, or, I don't know if I can get into your building or whatever at work, but you know what I mean? Like, I mean, one of my favorite things, especially for our students, because they have no context. And so it's like, I'm meeting with them. They come to Bridges, they meet other Christians there, but then I invite them to church or some different things. I think also in that case, it's pretty awesome, because for me, it wasn't that I like felt the gift of evangelism and then I felt like God called me into it. Man, I'm reading the same Bible as the rest of you, and I just saw that this is a calling on all Christians' lives. And that was actually a desire that like had to be cultivated for me. And so in this scenario, having somebody just come up to me and say like, I want to share the gospel. How do I do that?
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of tools that I could like, that just make it really simple. Just that way you feel like, you can guide a conversation or feel like, okay, I did it. I actually shared the gospel. But I think one of the best ways to start is to become a good question asker. Because you could share the gospel in a cookie cutter way, but you want to be able to share it in a relevant way, in a nuanced way, in a personal way. And so honestly, if somebody was like, hey, can you share the gospel with me? I could do it like I could just pull out, here's my favorite tool of the week or whatever. But I'd be much more apt to say, well, what's your spiritual background? Or like, have you ever been to church? Or what are your spiritual beliefs? Or what spiritual beliefs did you grow up with? Like, do you still carry those with you, or did they change? Or I think starting with what does spirituality look like in their life, starting where they're at, then you can like look back in your tool box or whatever and like, oh, this tool kind of connects to that.
Yeah. And
you can share the gospel that way. The other thing would be learn your own story too. Like you're asking questions and, hey, what does faith look like in your life? Oh, you have a hard time trusting God because of this event in your past, or man, you're in a hard time in your life and you really need patience or wisdom or hope. And then that opens up where it's like, actually, there was a time in my life when I was in that similar place where I needed hope and I didn't feel like I had any, or man, I was feeling really angry and frustrated and stuck. And but then like I met Jesus, or I read this verse, and those are ways where you can learn where they're at and then speak into it from your own experience and connect them to Jesus, just like you've been connected to Jesus.
That's so good. So good. I think so helpful, so empowering.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me take that detour. I appreciate both of you guys. I mean, I know these, but I also know these are the things that you're talking about with your students, with your volunteers, with your staff members. You're discussing yourself like constantly, right? I think it's really helpful for us as a church to even get to enter into that for a moment.
And it's okay. You're not gonna like, oh man, after, this still happens to me. Like after every time I have like a good gospel conversation, I get back in my car and I'm like, oh, that's what I should have said. That would have been perfect.
I have those conversations with Jason where I'm like, this happened and it was so good. And he's like, you could have said this too. And I was like, oh, that's so good.
Not helpful, Jason.
Not helpful. Now the conversation's over.
Yeah, that's right. But you can have another conversation.
Exactly.
That's what's great. Like, yes, we should have a high view of evangelism. Like, it is a special thing that we get to do. But man, it's really God's work. And so you're just give your 2 cents, give your best shot, and God's gonna multiply it.
And being faithful with people, right? Like you guys, you have that, we have that. Like we're seeing people every single week, and we're in people's lives, and we're seeing them consistently enough to be able to ask these questions and to be able to like continue to poke, like, okay, like where are you at in your walk now? Like what questions do you have about God now? And to like keep those conversations going, where it's not just like okay, I shared the gospel with them once and they said no, so I'm leaving it there. But just like a continual, like just as you continue the relationship, to continue to bring it back to who God is and what the gospel is.
That's so great. I think so helpful. I think it's something we can actually do. Yeah.
Can I turn this question around on you, Scott?
that look.
We got to give our 2 cents.
We're running out of time.
Oh,
no. What's that? What question?
We'll turn it around. I mean, same question back to you, man. What if somebody says, Scott, you're a pastor. You know all the answers.
Meet with my friend.
Yes, please. Would you just meet with my friend?
I mean, it's really interesting. I resonate with so much of what you both said. I think it's both helpful for me. I think that I really resonate with what you said about just being a good question asker. I think that sometimes we overemphasize the presentation, where I think the product of good question asking becomes that the presentation becomes obvious. Like if you know the gospel and you know a person well enough, you're going to see how the two connect to one another. But I'm also compelled by, and even just the intentionality of your roles and your calling, I'm compelled or maybe challenged by the fact that I think sometimes I can do so much question asking and even maybe encourage others to be like, oh, just you'll know the time is right. I think when you leave it up to that, the time never feels right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You never like feel comfortable.
Oh, this won't be awkward. Into.
You never like ultimately you have to step into the awkwardness.
Yeah.
Ultimately, like you can ask questions all you want, and that knowledge is really important and really foundational, but it's also not, it doesn't get you beyond awkwardness. It doesn't get you beyond the fact that I'm presenting you a message that without faith in Christ condemns you and shows you your need for Christ and the gloriousness of his grace. And so I think that the both confidence and willingness to step into that is a really important piece and important component as well. And I think that's where even the practice of cold call evangelism, which I think lots of people, maybe they did it in college and they haven't done it for years and years, but like,
and they have a bad taste from it.
But if you haven't like crossed that threshold in years, if you haven't crossed that threshold in months and shared the gospel with somebody, if you haven't crossed that threshold in weeks, and this is what I'm thinking even in my own life, like, is that really just because there's more questions to ask, right? Or is it because I'm hesitating in the places where the Lord's called all of us to, not just relational presence, but relational evangelism, right? To the actual sharing, the proclaiming of the, as Reggie talked about this morning, foolishness of the gospel. So Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm so thankful to hear you guys. So I did take up most of our time doing this. Which I actually think is really important. It's so helpful to hear your hearts in this, and I think the church is really edified by it. Maybe as one wrap up question to focus back on your individual ministries and contexts. What's been going on unique this year as we start, and how, in light of that, can we be praying for you and your ministries? That was a full-on yellow light. A back and forth yellow light is exactly what that was.
That was a double yellow.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Spencer.
Oh man, it's probably good that I go first because I'll use less words. I'll think of less things. That's right. Man, there's a couple things that are unique this year. I think we were really encouraged that, last year was so different because we were back in person. And this year we were encouraged because we saw similar turnout at the beginning of this semester.
Yeah.
The difference that I'm starting to see are some of these trends that maybe even started before COVID, but COVID either accelerated them or it just like jumped forward. One is that in our ministry specifically, we're seeing more Indians and less Chinese. It used to be about 50-50 or even more Chinese. But so that's just one trend. I think COVID and just politics has a big to do with that. I think also we are fully into Gen Z on campus. It's not coming. It's not, here in a small way. Like we are both feet in at this point. And I think just as we're seeing less Chinese, and in some ways, I think we're seeing the door kind of close in that way, but God's opening other doors where places like in the Middle East or even specific countries, like I'm thinking of Saudi or Iran, Ara would tell you the same. Like we're just seeing things today that were not true 10 years ago. And there's opportunities today that, different opportunities. There was opportunities 10 years ago that we're not seeing as much of today. Yeah. And there's opportunities that were today that we're not seeing as much 10 years ago. I think for us right now, where our movements are with Bridges, we've been able to gather students, and now the thing that we want to strengthen is moving just a friendship into that spiritual conversation, and not just having them come to a social Bridges event where they meet other Americans and international students, but for them to meet other Christians. The way like one of my teammates put it is that we've been able to gather the lost. Now we just need to bring the witness to them. And so I think that's one of the things that Cornerstone can be praying about, or you could be the answer to your own prayer in this, and come volunteer with us is, we're just looking for ways we found the students, we know where they are, we've even gathered them, but now it's like, well, where's the witness? We need more witness. And
I that's so exciting to me. I think both something we can continue to be praying for as a church, and I would just underscore that. I think for anybody who's like, kind of have a burden, I would have a desire to be able to share the gospel with people from other countries that haven't ever heard the gospel before. Like we have opportunities to do that teed up, like ready to go. Just connecting with Spencer. I mean, it's you don't have to fly across the world.
You don't. Yeah. And that's exactly what, like, I get really, I'm sitting in my seat here, like, kind of buzzing on this because I'm excited about it, because that is what I've been like hoping and praying for that Bridges would be. And whether it's like a Monday night at USC or Friday night at UCLA, or probably our biggest thing right now to put on the listener radar is we do a Thanksgiving pairing every year, where we're not asking you to do a totally separate meal, but just put an extra chair or two at your family's or your friends' Thanksgiving celebration and host a couple of these international students who've never, they've never celebrated the American holiday of Thanksgiving in a local LA home. It's just a simple way for us to be good hosts. I mean, they're here. We are hosting them.
Yeah.
It's just a question of, are we going to be good hosts? And you can try out some of those things, like learning to ask good questions, or maybe you don't share the whole gospel, maybe you only share a piece of it. But that for me is probably the biggest opportunity outside of like the weekly rhythms that we have.
Cool. Thanks, man. Yeah. What about for you, Steph?
Yeah, I think unique for us this year, Cal State Long Beach actually opened back up in like phases. And so the first year that we were on campus, there was only about a third of the student population on campus. And now we are at 100% capacity. And so the campus has been more full with people than we have seen in the past years. And so that's been pretty interesting to navigate, just with like, again, Gen Z culture, the different needs that the students are bringing. I feel like specifically the last couple of months, just running up against like hearing more from students, like this is like what my needs are. And if they're not, I think inherently in all of us, but like this is what my needs are. And if those are not met, then I don't want this. And so trying to navigate that, what feels like more and more now, with just like, yeah, like you can have what you want and you can do what you want and like take care of yourself. And that kind of takes priority. So trying to like shift that focus, even trying to help some of our students who have been believers for a while, shift their focus outward instead of just inward, like part of this relational evangelism, but also like there are people around you who are in need and it's not just all about what you want. And so I don't know, maybe some parents can relate with that, but it's currently where we're at.
If we're honest, some of us parents can relate with feeling that way.
Yeah.
So it's okay too. It's okay too. It's a pretty universal. I mean, that's definitely there's definitely a generational dynamic that goes on, but it just manifests itself in different ways generationally.
Yeah. And so and I think currently both with like students within our ministry and just the student population, I think is something that we're seeing. An upside has been, this is the first year where there's 2 more staff women on our team.
Hey, all right.
So now there's 3 of us.
Yeah.
So that's been pretty sweet just to see, like, I think feel like a little bit of relief of like, yeah, there's like more women around me to be able to like care and help the ladies who are in our ministry.
Yeah.
So that's been pretty sweet to see, and they have loads more energy than I do, and are closer to Long Beach. So that's fun to see that they're able to do more with students. And if you guys could just be praying for our team in terms of endurance and just strength to be able to like keep up with everyone and all of the changes and different dynamics with the student government and the way that campus itself wants things to be held in order. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the opportunity to both be involved and to be praying for each of you and your ministries and all these students that your ministries are engaging with. It's really exciting. I just encourage, if you're listening to take some time this week to also be praying for all these students, for that the gospel would go out, that the Lord would draw people to himself and through these efforts, and we get to see and rejoice in the answers of those prayers. And thanks for taking the time to share a little bit, allow us to be sharpened from your evangelistic focuses, and how that I think just reminds us all of the call back to that in each one of our lives. So I really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for the time. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing what you're doing. And thank you all for listening. Hope this has been as much of a blessing for you as it's been for me. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.